This morning we have quite a tangled web, and I have to ask you to follow along and we recapitulate some of the material we've already discussed. We have discussed that in the present cycle of evolution, we are working through 4 levels: physical, ethereal or vital, emotional, and mental. These are the 4 divisions of creatures that are on the earth at the present time and involved in this cycle of growth. Now, in the human being, this cycle is repeated in the material world in bodies. The physical body corresponds to the earth. The vital growth of a dimension of growth or development, water. The emotional nature, fire, and the mental nature, air. The 4 elements of antiquity are repeated in this pattern. Now, if we go back into the philosophies of the past, we realize that every civilization has observed these 4 levels with great care. They are involved in the rights of citizenship, in the tribe, in the race, in the nation, and in the human family. Every one of the great civilizations of the past had a rule or law which was very closely and carefully enforced. No individual was born a citizen. This is very important. He was not born equal. He had to attain equality. He had to prove definitely that he could administer the faculties and powers which were developing within him in the age of growth. Therefore, in most nations, there were puberty rights. One of the nations that performed this closely was Egypt. And the Egyptian child had a little lock of hair that hung over the forehead. Only when they reached a certain age was this lock cut off. And that was the beginning of their acceptance into the family of adults. Now, in order to pass the test for this puberty right, very definite instruction was given by the family, by the state, and particularly by the priesthood. It was pointed out to this young person that he was becoming a member of a family. That up to this point, the family had protected him. But when he became an individual, he had to protect both himself and the family. It was indispensable to the community that he carry his share of the responsibility of adulthood. Later, we have other rights for different developments. Both the men and women had the same puberty rights. Both were regarded as part of the family, and that they became a citizen. They had to take on not only the honors of citizenship, the privileges of citizenship, but the duties of citizenship. And it was in this point that we have gradually lost sight of the facts of life. We no longer recognize this vision, but it is nevertheless there. We now, or did up to recently, declare that a child could not vote until it was 21 years old. Now it can vote at 18. We kind of amended the constitution of nature, but that didn't mean anything to nature. That was our own arbitrary division. The fact remains that as every child grows, it not only has new opportunities, but new responsibilities. And it is only when opportunity and responsibility are brought together in a happy pattern that progress is possible in a community. Now we have today a recognition also of another factor in this ladder of steps upward from physical body to mental integrity. These steps, of course, are first the physical body, infancy, and the gradual processes of physical growth. But in this process, the individual is nursed by the great nurse, the earth. The infancy of the individual is always administered finally by the fecundity of nature. and it is administered in particular through parentage and through the ancestry of the line. Later, the child goes into the period of growth, and that becomes the period of water, corresponding to the vegetable kingdom. And here it becomes gradually assimilated to the patterns of the levels of life upon which it is to function in maturity. The animal comes into the third animal, or we in the elements, the fire level. Here the animal is subject to the laws of emotional existence. These laws are not set by the animal. They are set by nature. And they are set because they are the only way in which protoplasm can gradually evolve into deity, where every atom gradually becomes a deified being. It is all growth under law, growth under responsibility, growth under the burden of carrying our share of the responsibility for life. And finally, after education, which is under the fire level, we come to the mind. We come to the individualization. Here the individual becomes self-responsible. And in being self-responsible, he comes into contact with the mysterious element of air. Now, up to through the animal kingdom, the nature is governed by various orders or hierarchies. These orders administer the substances which are necessary in the building of the composite nature of the human being. When it comes, however, to the mental level, it comes to the threshold of individuality. And individuality is the factor that is largely influenced by the mental potential of the human being. Now, the mind is a very interesting instrument. It is something that we all are concerned with. It is something that is constantly causing us wonder and has brought us from flint and stone, has brought us from the beginning of life up to the computer, and how we don't know how much further. But all these things arise out of the mental dimension of the universal pattern. In India, among Eastern people, the mind is divided into two levels: high mind or higher mind and ordinary or mortal mind. These are according to the ancient rule, are rupa and arupa, formed and unformed, visible and invisible, human and divine. The mental agency, therefore, is a tremendous potential within the individual. In other words, the mind is something that develops inside of us. It is not something that is hung on the outside. It is not an added factor. It is an evolved factor. It is something that becomes obvious, visible, and tangible because it is in our own nature to unfold this way. Now, we call the mental faculty intelligence. And we know that this intelligence, as Lord Bacon points out, is two-sided or two-edged. It is, first of all, the ability of the individual to observe. And most all primitive people are observationalists. They study all things in terms of appearance or what they see happening. This was how primitive life evolved. But as long as this observation was accurate, the primitive life grew in proper pattern. And nearly all the scriptures of mankind are based upon the observation of the natural or primitive way of life, the laws, the inevitable laws that govern all processes in nature. Now, in this problem of mind, we therefore have the mind principle within the individual, and we have the mind consequences in society. We know that nearly all that we can possibly think of as having been achieved in civilization has come forth out of the individual. It has not come from the outside, but it has caused to evolve or develop around itself an external structure. Therefore, we have both intelligence, which is internal, and intellectualism, which is external. And these two forms of intelligence were recognized by the Greeks, who built their philosophies upon it. This pair, therefore, consequently provides us with opportunity. First of all, environment inspires us to release internal potential. We find ourselves in a world of infinite potential, infinite opportunity, and we feel impelled to advance along the lines of these opportunities. But it also prepares us or bestows upon us something else. That is the responsibility of recognizing the consequence of depending entirely upon an external for an internal growth. We are more or less confronted, therefore, with living with the internal potential, which must always be in the line of growth, and the consequences of that potential in society, which is gradually building an imaginary or illusionary structure through the misuse and abuse of potential. We have, therefore, today in the world, a world of people living as a result of thought. But the thought they are living from has been brought through from an internal integrity to an external compromise. The compromise being the determination to exploit resource rather than to use it. The mind says whatever power we have should be used correctly. Ambitions and appetites say we should use it to our own advantage. Then for the internal mind then says, what is our advantage? And the answer, of course, is the real advantage is to keep the rules. The disadvantage is to try to break it. And almost all your scriptural writings of the world, the Bibles of mankind, are really developments in words and thoughts of the proven experiences of humanity as to the reality of the victory of integrity over indulgence, the victory of truth over error, the victory of intelligence over ignorance. All these factors have to be taken into consideration. But out of it all comes a recognition that we have two basic sources of knowledge. We come into the world, therefore, and we pass through the various stages of childhood. We go to school, and we finally come out into individual life. Our school period is represented by the animal kingdom. Therefore, that is what is supposed to prepare us within ourselves for the individualization of our mental nature. Now, when we go to school, what do we learn? This is all largely a matter of the development of an educational theory. Now, this can be developed in two ways. First, by listening to the voice from within, which tells us the reality of these matters, and the voice that comes from the outside, which is largely self-centered and to the advantage of the moment at the expense of eternity. So we recognize that the problem of education is something to begin to think about very carefully. When you go to school, you are supposed to learn how to live. Learn how to live. You're supposed to learn the proper way of using the resources which have been bestowed upon you. Education, therefore, is actually a process for releasing or bringing forth into manifestation the eternal wisdom that rests in universal mind. It is the individual taking his place in the universal plan of things on a mental level. We must learn to obey the beginning in all truth, the nature. The beginning rests in obedience. The moment we disobey, we endanger our own survival, and very largely endanger the survival of the civilization to which we belong. So we say, when you go to school, you should learn something. You should learn what nature wants, what the universal laws demand, and not what the selfish human beings wish to do. We are now basing our education almost entirely upon the corruptions and misfortunes of selfishness, egotism, and exploitation. we are subtly teaching the new generation to exploit the members of itself. We are teaching them to keep on with the processes which have already failed with us. We are teaching them that the purpose for life is wealth and fame and gratification. This is not true. And as long as this is the basis of education, the wisdom principle within ourselves is stymied. The inner life is gradually blocked out because it is invisible, because it is causal, and because the average person doesn't know he has it. And in the place of it is this material adjustment by which he seems to be able to become rich and famous and can also fall into all the bad habits, crimes, and delinquencies which afflict us today. It becomes obvious, therefore, that our education is coming from the outside when it should be a release from within of the mental potential. The mind is not materialistic. The mind is not selfish. The mind is not self-centered. These are the consequences of compromising it for the advantage of personal success. We take this thread of mind which we have in us, and we gradually condition it so that instead of being the leader of our life, it becomes the slave of our appetites. We use the mind and we abuse it. We do not recognize it that it is the source of our greatest happiness and greatest security if we use it properly. If, however, we tarnish it, as we have done in centuries gone by, we will gradually use the mind as a destroyer and will then blame the mind for the misuse of itself, while the actual blame lies within the person who has forgotten to fulfill the proper destiny for which man was created. Man was to be created as a leader over the elements and over the visible kingdoms of nature. And at the present moment of all the kingdoms, he is probably the least honest. Animals are not dishonest. Plants are not dishonest. Minerals certainly are not dishonest. We do not recognize these virtues in them at all. But they have no faults because they have no individuality. They are under group leadership, and each fulfills that which is necessary to advance the collective. We have reached a point in mental individuality where we are not considering the collective. We are not doing the things which makes the greater good for all. We are doing that which we feel is the greatest good for ourselves, or those small groups to which we belong. We have done exactly the same thing in politics, religion, ethics, education, economy, and all the divisions of society. Everything now is the fulfillment of personal ambition, and no consideration for that which is the basic reason for being here. We are not here by accident, even though it might seem biologically that we are. We are here because there is a group entity which is sending forth these beings into material distance in order to teach them one of the greatest rules and laws in life, and that is to keep the rule. We find that actually, from the cradle to the grave, we are passing through initiational tests. We are being tried, we are being weighed in the balance. We are being subjected to disciplines of various kinds, and there can be no peace, no security, no true growth in the world until the individual accepts the discipline, lives according to it, and shares the new wisdom that he develops with others of a similar nature and works together with others for the betterment of the entire. Until these principles are well understood, the problem is very difficult. Comenius, the Moravian educator, gave us the secret of the public school system. He tells us very simply that the reason for the public school is to teach us the importance of working together for the common good. That education, educo, is from the word which means to draw forth, to bring out from within ourselves certain knowledge that is inherent. And this knowledge, which is inherent, is the most important of all. That is the truest knowledge that we have. Knowledge from the outside may lead to skill in arts and sciences, but it does not lead to the perfection of integrity. All that is good in man's philosophy comes from within himself. All that is a mistake comes from following the examples of those who have failed to achieve individual integration. So we have now, as Comenius said, and what has later been said by a number of others, that actually our education, as far as nature is concerned, is complete when we are 21 years old. But even before that, we do not require as much of the schooling as we think we do. We are educated in fallacies. We are educated in mistakes. We are given a reward, a degree, a recognition for doing the wrong thing. We are given honors and values in life for becoming important and heroic personalities by making mistakes. Actually, the entire theory of our world as it is at the present time is the victory of the unimportant over the essential. And as long as it remains that way, we're in trouble. Now, if we want to start in from the inside out, we have to recognize definitely that what is lying within us is actually a form of natural intellect. It is a form of intelligence that is based upon what is locked in the cells and in the tissues and in the substances which we bring with us into birth. Each of the little cells in our body has an intelligence of its own. All these intelligences become together great groups of populations within ourselves. When we break the rules, the individual cell suffers. When we break the rules badly enough, the whole structure suffers. And when we allow exploitation to cause us to live badly, we destroy the entire pattern of our own survival. There's only one way in which we can achieve that which we most want, and that is we have to do it right in the first place. And if having done it right, we are able to see the consequences, there will be very little problem of failure to cooperate. But we have set up a vicious mechanism here by rewarding mistakes. We have made the mistake the important thing, and we have not given the necessary understanding of the background of the problem. The average person who goes to school has no idea why humanity exists. He has no idea concerning a spiritual factor in material existence. He has no general comprehension of the rules of life as these differ from the rules of social and political structures. He does not know where he came from. He does not know why he is here. And he has no idea where he's going. And on this compound ignorance, we offer degrees and make brilliant scholars out of people who have never answered any of those questions. It is one of these amazing things that we have created a great hierarchy of well-lettered ignorance. We have made everything subservient not to wisdom, but to the passing advantages of the hour. We're in exactly this position politically today. We are concerned not at all with what is good for the people, but what is advantageous to certain groups within the people. We are not able to decide what constitutes a good government, and therefore we have a bad one. We do not understand why we should work together, so we do not. And yet, how can we be educated without at least a glimmer of realization of the importance of cooperation? How can we become strong and powerful without keeping any ethical rules or accepting any responsibility for our own mistakes? This is why we go back to people like Plato and Aristotle, Pythagoras, to understand something about these principles. And they say there are two ways of being governed. One from the inside, which is right, and the other from the outside, which is wrong and unnecessary. If the inside is right, the outside will be right. If the inside has no chance, is unable to manifest itself, then the outside is almost certain to be corrupt. And if there are corrections made from the outside, they serve only the needs of the outside. And that part of the individual which is within himself and most valuable is still neglected. So we say to ourselves, this golden fleece that we are all seeking is inside of our own natures. We bring it with us into birth. We live with it all our lives. Occasionally we let a moment of it come through, but become frightened with our own audacity and go back again to the shelter of the herd, to the shelter of the conventions of the many, with no regard for the integrity of the life within ourselves. Now, as a result of this type of attitude, and this type of solution, or lack of it, we produce a world of problems, a world which is getting into a very sticky wicket at the present time. We are on the verge of more trouble, simply because we have never tried to find out what causes trouble. And when we find out what causes it, the answer is ignorance. Now, ignorance is either simple or complex. A simple ignorance is not to know that which is right. Compound ignorance is not to know when we are wrong. We have got to find ways in which to remedy our own mistakes. And this was part of the old philosophy of Egypt. When the time came for the individual to take the rights, to accept maturity, to accept the responsibility of life, and this was also true of the American Indian tribes of this continent. When the time came, become a citizen, the individual is not made one. He becomes one by a dedicated expression of his own integrity. He is put through certain tests, and very interesting points of one of them was recorded by Cortez in his conquest of Mexico. The Aztecs had a very strong attitude on the subject of drink. Now, we might not assume that pulque, or whatever they were drinking in those days, was important. But the Aztecs had a simple rule, that any individual under 50 who drank broke law and was punished. There could be no such a thing as a juvenile alcoholic, because if the individual drank under the age of 50, then he was punished. If after 50 he took a little now and then, it was condoned. It was no longer a rule. It was because it was assumed that he was tired, that he was maybe a little infirm, a little discouraged with life, and it was all different. But youth could not do it. This is a rather interesting rule. Supposing we made it impossible for anyone under 50 to sin without being punished, there wouldn't have institutions room for them. We wouldn't be able to live with ourselves. And yet the principle is just part of nature, that you want the youth to support the nation. You want young people to grow, to build, create. And if you fill them up with some kind of alcoholic liquid or narcotics or something of that nature, you destroy the future of the country. The Aztecs knew this. Apparently we haven't got quite up to that yet. We are still suffering from self-imposed ignorance. So we start in and we study the problems of mind. Now, what is mind's primary situation? What is the mind here to do? It is here to lead the compound of the body toward the growth which nature demands. The mind is given to us that we may think straight, that we may have the courage to grow. It gives us also the impulse to learn more by the consideration of the phenomena of life around us. It is all part of the pattern of maturity. The mature person is thoughtful, responsible, and eager to learn that which is necessary and right. The mature person expects to control habits, expects to put principles above personality. All these things are possible when the mind leads the body. If, however, the mind becomes simply a slave of the pressures of the animal kingdom, then we no longer have this situation. The mind becomes the arch conspirator. The mind makes all kinds of wonderful plans for the simple purpose of taking the individual away from his own integrities. He has no solid ground of integrities. So here we should begin with what constitutes education. We should have the world working with this problem. The world should be working with the concept that education is learning to be a citizen of the world, and that the world that is made up of educated people can go on for 1,000 years without a war, because wars are all the result of the acceptance of ignorance. They are the result of breaking laws, breaking the rules, and employing violent means of accomplishing what should be attained by the kindness of spirit. So in the development of civilization, the problem comes, what should we teach the young? Well, it's good to teach them the alphabet, I guess. We have to communicate with each other. Of course, we hardly have to read and write anymore. That's all computerized. We hardly have to make any decisions of importance. They're all classically developed along lines of prevailing patterns. Now we see, for instance, the problem with the computer. Here we have a very useful device, and the development and invention of it had to come from within, because it represents the use of exact rules which the individual and community existence put together have worked out for a number of years. It is therefore a hopeful thing, something that can bring usefulness and bring education and bring enlightenment to people. So, how are we going to use it? Probably the same way we use television. We're going to abuse it, we're going to exploit it, we're going to make it the basis of a wave of crime we have never known the likes of which before. We are going to take this thing that might be useful, and because we are ignorant, we will destroy it. And the mere fact that we are scientific enough to invent it does not mean that we are moral enough not to abuse it. So somewhere there is the skill to do, and the ignorance to do wrong. These things have become very important in the study of the mental life of the human being. So, how are we going to use it? Probably the same way we use television. We're going to abuse it, we're going to exploit it, we're going to make it the basis of a wave of crime we have never known the likes of which before. We are going to take this thing that might be useful, and because we are ignorant, we will destroy it. And the mere fact that we are scientific enough to invent it does not mean that we are moral enough not to abuse it. So somewhere there is the skill to do, and the ignorance to do wrong. These things have become very important in the study of the mental life of the human being. So we have now these different things to consider, and one man not long ago observed in the press that in all probabilities the school system can only educate up through the grammar school, and after the grammar school, schools have practically nothing to give. Because the moment you get beyond the very simple facts of life, you'll get into interpretations which force to vicious misuse. We go into a school, the high school, and the college, and the university, not because we are primarily concerned with the good of humanity, but because we are primarily concerned with the advancement of personal career. And selfishness is really the end of integrity on almost every level of human function. So we are now on the verge of trying to find out a little more about how the mind can help us in this extremity. The mind gradually evolves in this body. It is very often limited by heredity. It is limited by lack of opportunity. It is limited by economic conditions, social conditions, political piracies of one kind or another. But it is here to help us to grow. And usually it should be taught before school age. And here brings another serious situation. In other words, integrity has slowly faded away in relationships of human beings to each other. The relationship of marriage is falling apart. The respect of parents and children is no longer stressed. Everyone is on his own, out to do it his own thing, out to waste time. We've had a number of young people have come to me to try to find out some of the problems that they face. And most of them were troubled with one basic value, that they wished to do as they pleased, that they wished to be themselves, and by themselves they meant to drink whenever they felt like it. By themselves they meant how to break all the rules without being punished. It was never the point of themselves trying to lead them to a better way. They did not recognize the internal factor of growth, and they did not realize that the abuse and misuse of this inner faculty was resulting in physical and emotional distress. The moment the mental factor does not retain leadership over the life begins to fall apart. And leadership is not the ability to put the scheme through. Leadership is not skilled to exploit. Leadership is the understanding and insight to abuse and protect faculties and bodies from abuse. The moment the mind abuses the physical body, problems start. It becomes the same thing as a country falling under a dictator. This dictator, with only one point in mind, his own advantage, is represented in the body by the determination to do what we please, regardless of whether it is right or wrong. We then expect the body to cooperate. The body will never cooperate with that which is wrong, because it has no experience of wrong ever being right. But it continues to struggle against the pressures of misuse. The result is continuous breakdown, continuous corruption, and continuous failure of the body to cooperate. Little by little, we gradually destroy the power of the mind to lead the body. And when this power is lost, we come into serious problems. And so we may say with some of the Oriental peoples, what is the mind? Is it some little nodule somewhere in the compound of human being that has a kind of skill, power, or energy, an inevitable resource to lead the rest? I think the answer to this is that in all the kingdoms of nature, there are experiences. Minerals have experience, although we probably don't know what it is, never will know. But we did know once. Animals have experience. Plants have experience. And they have the experience of natural things, and they have the experience of man-made corruption of nature. Nature knows what's wrong with us long before we find it out. Nature also realizes the care with which we will avoid doing the right thing. So through the development of the individual, through the cycles of rebirth, through the processes of evolution, there is an internal integrity built up within us. There is a center in which all useful knowledge is preserved. There is a reference bank. There is something which is available but seldom called upon. There is the experience of the past to lead to the future. This experience has nothing to do with the fulfillment of our personal desires, except perhaps to expose their futility. But this experience is down to thousands of years of evolution. We have gradually come to know what can be done and what cannot be done, and what we should be thinking instead of what we are thinking. So this center of record, this reference center, this library in which all the records of our own existence are kept, is locked in what we call the memory sequences, or in the mind. So the mind is what it is because it has learned everything that it could learn up to the present level of its growth. Therefore, we can say that it's like a wise old man living on the top of a hill somewhere, an old guru, and the disciples and the students all go to hear him and to learn from him and to gain wisdom from his instruction. So we have within ourselves the guru, the super guru, the teacher that can tell us exactly what is wrong with ourselves, exactly what we have done that is not right, and why we did it, and how we are in danger of repeating the mistake. So we have this source, and the attainment of contact with it is very largely through what we now call meditational disciplines. Meditation in the sense of be still and know. We find this as a scriptural statement. We know that I am God. Now, by being still, we mean for a moment or two to make peace with our own futilities. By being at peace, we mean not selfish for a little while, forgetting self, forgetting ambition, forgetting to revenge ourselves, forgetting to hate, forgetting to misplace our affections and emotions. In other words, to let the inside out, you've got to quiet down the outside.